Everyone thinks fertilizer is something you buy: bags, liquids, pellets. But for most of history, soil fertility came from plants that rebuilt the ground every season. One forgotten tree produces endless biomass, feeds the soil non-stop, and grows fruit at the same time. Almost nobody uses it anymore. This video is not claiming that one leaf replaces a bag of fertilizer overnight. That would be dishonest. What it shows is something more important: how a single plant can rebuild soil continuously, year after year, without external inputs. No factories, no deliveries, no dependency. Just a biological cycle that keeps running as long as the plant is alive and growing. Modern gardening teaches us to feed plants directly with nutrients measured in numbers and ratios. But soil does not work like a machine. Real fertility comes from organic matter, microbial life, and constant carbon inputs. When those elements are missing, fertilizers only mask the problem instead of fixing it. The soil looks productive, but it is getting weaker underneath. For centuries, farmers understood this difference. They did not ask how to feed plants. They asked how to feed soil. Trees and perennial plants played a central role because they produced large amounts of biomass without being replanted every year. That biomass was returned to the ground, slowly building fertility that improved harvests over time instead of exhausting the land. Mulberry trees were never valued only for their fruit. Historically, they were planted because of how aggressively they grow and how much organic material they produce. Large leaves, fast regrowth, constant shedding. All of that material was considered valuable. It was cut, dropped, composted, or left to decompose naturally, feeding the soil instead of being removed from it. Every growing season, a mature mulberry produces an enormous amount of leaves. Those leaves fall or are cut and placed on the soil as mulch. Over time, that mulch breaks down into humus. Humus feeds microbes, improves soil structure, holds moisture, and releases nutrients slowly. This is not instant fertilizer. It is long-term fertility created by a living system. Unlike annual crops, mulberry does not need to be replanted to keep producing biomass. Once established, the cycle repeats automatically. Growth, pruning, leaf drop, regrowth. Each cycle adds more organic matter to the soil. Year after year, the ground becomes darker, softer, and more resilient. Fertility increases without additional labor or external inputs. This is why the idea of infinite fertilizer makes sense here. Not because nutrients appear from nowhere, but because the process never stops. As long as the tree is alive, biomass continues to flow into the soil. The system feeds itself. Instead of buying fertility repeatedly, the gardener maintains a plant that creates it naturally. Mulberry leaves are extremely versatile in this system. They can be used directly as chop-and-drop mulch around vegetables or trees. They can be composted, they can be fed to animals and returned as manure, or they can simply fall where they grow. Every path leads back to the same outcome: more organic matter and healthier soil. This type of fertility does not show dramatic results in a single week. It builds slowly, season after season. But unlike chemical inputs, it compounds. Each year improves the next. Water retention increases. Soil structure improves. Plants become less dependent on constant feeding and more tolerant of heat, drought, and stress as the system matures. If this sounds too simple, that is exactly why it disappeared from modern agriculture. Mulberry creates fertility without selling products, subscriptions, or replacements. It does not fit systems built around recurring inputs. In the next section, you will see why methods like this were abandoned and why they are quietly returning as people look for resilient ways to grow food. One of the most practical ways to use mulberry is through regular pruning. Cutting branches and leaves several times per season does not weaken the tree, it strengthens it. Each cut triggers faster regrowth and produces even more biomass. That biomass can be dropped directly onto garden beds, creating a protective layer that feeds the soil while suppressing weeds. This method is often called chop and drop. Instead of removing material from the garden, everything stays on site. Leaves break down where they fall. Nutrients are recycled instead of exported. Over time, this creates a closed-loop system where fertility is built in place rather than imported from outside sources. Mulberry works especially well around fruit trees and perennial crops. Its fast-growing leaves provide constant mulch, protecting roots from heat and cold. As the leaves decompose, they improve soil structure and increase microbial activity. This makes surrounding plants more resilient without requiring additional fertilizers or soil amendments. Another advantage of mulberry is how early it produces leaves in the season. While many plants are still waking up, mulberry is already growing. That early biomass jumpstarts soil life when other sources of organic matter are limited. It sets the tone for the entire growing season before annual crops even get established. This is a good moment to pause and reflect on how different this approach is from conventional gardening. If this way of thinking makes sense to you, consider subscribing to the channel. The goal here is not quick tricks, but systems that keep working year after year with less effort and fewer inputs. Mulberry is also tolerant of poor soils. It does not need perfect conditions to begin improving the ground. In compacted or degraded areas, its roots help loosen soil structure over time. Leaf drop adds organic matter where it is most needed. This makes it a useful starting point for rebuilding land that has been exhausted. It is important to understand the limits of this system. Mulberry does not replace nutrients instantly, and it does not eliminate the need for patience. Fertility builds gradually. Expect improvements over seasons, not days. This slow pace is a feature, not a flaw, because it creates stability instead of dependence. One reason mulberry fell out of favor is control. It grows vigorously and can spread if unmanaged. In industrial systems, that behavior is seen as a problem. In a home garden or small farm, it can be an advantage. Regular pruning turns that energy into usable material instead of wasted growth. Another reason is economics. Fertility created on site does not generate repeat sales. It cannot be packaged or shipped. As agriculture shifted toward inputs that could be sold, systems that produced their own fertility were slowly abandoned. What remained were products, not processes. Despite this, mulberry never disappeared completely. It survived on the edges of farms, in old homesteads, and in places where people valued resilience over efficiency. In the next section, we will look at how to place mulberry correctly, avoid common mistakes, and use it without letting it take over your garden. Correct placement is critical when using mulberry for soil fertility. It should not compete directly with small annual crops. Instead, it works best on the edges of gardens, near fruit trees, or in zones where biomass can be harvested and moved. When positioned this way, it feeds the system without shading or overpowering more delicate plants. Spacing matters more than most people expect. Mulberry grows fast and wide, so planting it too close to beds creates unnecessary problems. Giving it room allows better airflow, easier pruning, and healthier regrowth. The goal is not to let it dominate the garden, but to turn its natural vigor into a controlled source of fertility. Pruning should be intentional, not random. Cutting during active growth produces the most usable biomass. Leaves are tender, break down quickly, and feed soil life faster. Heavy pruning does not harm mulberry when done correctly. In fact, regular cutting keeps the tree productive and prevents it from becoming woody and difficult to manage. Timing also matters. Early season cuts help jumpstart soil biology, while mid-season pruning supplies mulch during heat and drought. Late season leaf drop protects soil through winter. Used this way, mulberry supports the garden year-round, not just during harvest. Few plants offer that level of continuous contribution with so little effort. One common mistake is trying to remove mulberry leaves from the system. When biomass is taken away, fertility leaves with it. The strength of this method comes from keeping nutrients cycling on site. Whether leaves are dropped directly, composted nearby, or fed to animals, they must return to the soil to complete the loop. Mulberry works best as part of a larger system, not as a standalone solution. Combined with other perennials, ground covers, and minimal disturbance, its impact multiplies. The tree supplies material, microbes do the work, and the soil improves gradually. This is how fertility was built before modern inputs existed. It is also worth noting that mulberry adapts to many climates and soil types. Once established, it tolerates heat, cold, and inconsistent rainfall. That adaptability makes it valuable in uncertain conditions. While other fertility strategies fail under stress, mulberry continues producing biomass that keeps soil protected and fed. People often ask whether mulberry fruit competes with its role as a fertility plant. It does not. Fruit production and leaf growth happen together. The tree feeds people while feeding the soil. Historically, this dual purpose is exactly why it was planted so widely before specialized agriculture separated food and fertility into different systems. Managing mulberry is mostly about restraint. It does not need constant attention, fertilizers, or irrigation once established. Overmanaging it defeats the purpose. Letting it grow, then harvesting biomass when needed, keeps labor low and results consistent. This simplicity is what makes the system sustainable long-term. At this point, the pattern should be clear. Mulberry creates fertility by doing what it naturally wants to do, grow fast, and produce leaves. When that growth is guided instead of suppressed, the soil benefits year after year. In the final section, we will summarize why this approach matters now more than ever. Industrial fertilizer is designed for speed, not longevity. It delivers nutrients quickly, then disappears, often leaving soil structure weaker than before. Mulberry works in the opposite direction. It adds carbon, protects microbes, and improves structure first. Nutrients are released slowly as biology processes the material, creating fertility that lasts instead of spiking and crashing. Another difference is dependency. Fertilizers must be purchased repeatedly. When prices rise or supply chains break, gardens suffer. Mulberry does not rely on availability or shipping. Once planted, it produces fertility locally every season. That independence is subtle but powerful, especially in times when inputs become unpredictable or expensive. This approach also reduces risk. Gardens built on continuous organic matter handle drought, heat, and heavy rain better than those dependent on soluble nutrients. Soil with structure drains excess water, holds moisture longer, and resists erosion. Mulberry contributes to all of these traits simply by existing and being managed correctly. There is also a mental shift involved. Instead of asking what the soil needs today, this system asks what the soil needs next year. Mulberry fits that mindset perfectly. It rewards patience, consistency, and observation. Over time, the gardener becomes a manager of processes rather than a buyer of solutions. In many old homesteads, mulberry trees still stand where gardens once thrived. They remain as quiet evidence of how fertility was maintained before modern products existed. Those trees did not survive by accident. They survived because they provided value beyond fruit, supporting entire systems without constant replacement. What disappeared was not the plant, but the knowledge around it. As agriculture shifted toward inputs and efficiency, systems that produced their own fertility were no longer taught. Mulberry became just a fruit tree, stripped of its original purpose. Recovering that perspective is less about nostalgia and more about practicality. This is not a call to abandon all fertilizers immediately. It is an invitation to reduce dependence over time. By integrating plants like mulberry, gardeners can lower input needs gradually while improving soil health. The result is a system that becomes easier to maintain instead of more demanding each season. When people see this system working, they often ask why it is not more widely recommended. The answer is simple. It cannot be sold easily. It requires observation instead of instructions, patience instead of purchases. Those qualities do not fit modern marketing, but they fit real gardens very well. Mulberry does not promise instant transformation. It promises steady improvement. That difference matters. Gardens built on steady improvement survive mistakes, weather extremes, and changing conditions. Over time, that resilience becomes more valuable than any single season of high yields driven by external inputs. At this stage, the idea should be clear. Fertility does not need to be manufactured, it can be grown. Mulberry is one example of how plants once carried that responsibility. In the final section, we will bring everything together and explain why revisiting this approach matters now more than ever. As climates become less predictable, systems that depend on constant correction begin to fail. Mulberry-based fertility does not need fine-tuning. It absorbs excess rain, protects soil during heat, and rebuilds structure after stress. This flexibility is why older systems relied on plants instead of formulas. They adjusted naturally to conditions instead of fighting them. Another overlooked benefit is time. Gardens built around constant feeding require attention every week. Systems that generate their own fertility demand far less intervention. Mulberry grows, drops leaves, and regrows whether the gardener is present or not. That reliability matters for people who want food security without constant labor. This is especially relevant for small gardens and homesteads. Space is limited, budgets are tight, and mistakes are costly. A plant that improves soil while producing fruit and biomass makes better use of every square foot. Mulberry compresses multiple functions into one place, which is the core principle of resilient design. It is also important to address concerns honestly. Mulberry can spread if unmanaged, and some varieties fruit heavily, attracting birds. These are not flaws but traits that require planning. Proper placement and pruning turn potential problems into advantages, allowing the tree to support the system instead of disrupting it. Choosing mulberry is not about rejecting modern knowledge. It is about combining what worked before with what we know now. Soil science confirms the value of organic matter, microbial diversity, and continuous cover. Mulberry naturally delivers all three. That alignment between old practice and modern understanding is rare and valuable. Over time, gardens built this way become easier to manage. Weeds decline, watering needs drop, and plants grow more consistently. Fertility becomes a background process instead of a constant task. This shift changes the gardener's role from problem solver to observer, adjusting systems rather than reacting to failures. This perspective explains why mulberry remained common in self-sufficient communities long after industrial agriculture took hold elsewhere. Where inputs were scarce or unreliable, systems that regenerated themselves survived. The tree did not need persuasion. It simply kept doing what it was designed to do, season after season. Reintroducing mulberry today does not require abandoning everything else. It can begin at the edges, in unused corners, or alongside existing plantings. Over time, its effect spreads outward. Soil improves first nearby, then across the garden. Change happens quietly, but it is visible to anyone paying attention. What matters most is understanding the principle, not copying a specific setup. Any system that produces continuous biomass and keeps it cycling on site builds fertility. Mulberry is a powerful example because it combines speed, resilience, and usefulness. It shows how fertility can be grown rather than purchased. When people ask why methods like this disappeared, the answer is not mystery or conspiracy. It is economics and convenience. Products replaced processes. Knowledge was simplified into instructions. Revisiting plants like mulberry is not about going backward, but about restoring balance to how we grow food. Mulberry shows that fertility does not need to be manufactured, optimized, or constantly corrected. It needs to be supported. By allowing a plant to express its natural growth cycle and returning that growth to the soil, a long-term system emerges. This approach reduces dependence, lowers risk, and creates stability. It is quiet, slow, and effective, which is why it was overlooked in a world focused on speed. The idea is simple. Instead of asking what the soil lacks, ask what it can grow to fix itself. Mulberry is one answer, not the only one, but it proves that fertility can come from living systems instead of external inputs. Understanding that shift changes how gardens are built, managed, and sustained for the future.